Angular has this built-in feature called dependency injection, which in the end means that components, directives, and services can request values, dependencies they rely on, which are then provided by Angular. The idea is that you don't have to create service instances yourself, though as you will see later, Angular's dependency injection mechanism is actually not limited to services, but it's the most common type of value that is requested and injected. So the idea is that you don't have to create those values, those services on your own, but that instead you request them in your components, directives, and services from Angular, and then Angular creates those values, those service class instances, for example, and passes them to your components, directives, and services. And for that, Angular uses multiple injectors, which it manages, where you can register your services, and I'll get back to that later, how you can register things with these injectors. And your components, directives, or services in the end, then when they request a dependency, go through these injectors and see if the dependency can be fetched from there, if Angular is able to provide the requested service class with one of its injectors. But again, I'll get back to those injectors later. For the moment, it's just important to understand that the idea is not that you create instances like this one here on your own, but that you instead use Angular for that. And you saw that earlier in the course already, of course. It's just really important to understand this concept. Therefore, what you would do here in the new task component is, instead of instantiating this tasks service on your own, you would request it as a dependency by specifying it as a parameter here in the constructor. So here we could specify the tService parameter, the name doesn't matter, which should be of type tasks service. And the type does matter because Angular's compiler will in the end pick up that type and understand that you're requesting a dependency of that type here, and it will then kick off that dependency injection mechanism because of this type in this constructor here. So this type here is important. And then here we could set our tasks service to this tService parameter value, so to this instance of the tasks service that has been provided by Angular. And it is Angular that will create and provide that instance because these component classes, just like directive classes or service classes, are not instantiated by us anywhere in our code. Instead, Angular will do that behind the scenes. So it's Angular's job to provide the values for the parameters in the constructor function. Now, this is the longest possible way of writing this code. A shorter way would be to use a TypeScript shortcut and add the private or public keyword in front of this parameter here, so that TypeScript would automatically go ahead and create a property with the same name for this class. That's simply a convenient feature offered by TypeScript. And therefore, we could then get rid of this extra property here and instead rename this here to tasks service and get rid of this code, and therefore have a shorter way of requesting a service. By the way, whether you use private or public here isn't too important. The main difference here is that private properties are not accessible from inside the template, whereas public properties are. And that might matter because you might want to make sure that from inside the template, you're not accidentally directly interacting with the service, but that you instead only use it from inside your component class. So with that done, finally, we're injecting the service such that we'll be operating on one shared instance across the entire application. Now, of course, we also want to access the service from inside the tasks list component to get hold of our tasks there. And that's what we'll take care of in the next lecture, and there I'll also show you another way of injecting values into components or other things in Angular. So here in the tasks list component, we of course also want to use that tasks service because it's here where we need to output the tasks in the end. So therefore, we also want to inject the tasks service here into the tasks list component. We could do this with the constructor again, that would be fine. And there are Angular developers who always use this approach because they prefer it, which is of course fine. But there also is an alternative syntax. Instead of using the constructor, you can add a property, a private or a non-private, a public one, it doesn't matter. Here I'll go for a private one, which I'll also name task service. And then you can assign an injected value and request such a value from Angular with help of the built-in inject function, which is imported from Angular core. This inject function can be used to request a dependency from Angular. And to inject, you then pass your injection token, as it's called, which in the end is again the service class name here. So again, just as before, you must import tasks service here into the tasks list component and then use that class name as a value for inject. With that, the service is available here as well. And now we can replace the dummy tasks array here, which is always empty, with the tasks from our service. For that, we can use the tasks service like this, and then refer to tasks. And tasks is then a signal, so now tasks here is a signal. Though it's a writable signal, as you can tell. And that might be fine. There's nothing wrong with it, but you also might prefer to expose read-only signals to your components and so on, so that the only logic that may change the signal value resides in the service. This is not something you have to do, but something that you could consider doing so that you enforce a clear separation of the place where you manage your data and the place where you use that data. Right now, you could manipulate the data from inside the tasks list component, since it has access to that writable signal, and you might not want that. Therefore, here in this case, I will go to the tasks service and actually make this tasks signal here private, which then in this case means that it can only be used from inside this tasks service class, but not from inside the components that inject the service. Now, to still expose the data, I'll therefore add a new property, which I'll name all tasks, which is simply this tasks as read-only, which is a method offered by Angular, which in the end also yields a signal, but a read-only signal. And with that back in the tasks list component, I can now access all tasks here. And now tasks is that read-only signal. And that makes sure that I can't accidentally change that tasks data from inside the tasks list component, and I instead enforce that clear separation. Now, since tasks is a signal, we should go to the tasks list component HTML file, to the template, and there read tasks like this. Since it is a signal, we need to read it like this, so that Angular also sets up that subscription behind the scenes. And I want to track the task ID as a unique identifier for the individual task items. And with that, finally, we got the task service, which manages the data and has the logic for changing that data. And we have the new task component, which calls add task to trigger that method where a new task is added, as well as the tasks list component where we also inject the service to get hold of those tasks and output them. And therefore, with all that done, if you save all these files, if you go back to your website and you add a new task like this, you should see it show up in the tasks list down there. At the moment, changing the status doesn't work and this filter doesn't work, so that's all something we have yet to add. But adding tasks that does work. And that's, of course, an important step in the right direction, and even more importantly, allowed us to refresh the important essentials you must know about services and dependency injection. Now we can continue refining this application, and we can then also dive deeper into services and dependency injection.